They laughed as if I wasn't even in the room. The flash of the camera went off, capturing the perfect family picture. My husband in the middle, my children and their spouses crowded around him, the grandkids squirming but still smiling. Me. I was standing 3 feet away holding a dish towel damp from the sink, my hands still raw from scrubbing pots. What would you do if you gave everything for 17 years? And they acted like you didn't exist. Don't miss a single second of this story, it's one you'll never forget. I smiled because that's what they expected me to do. But inside I felt a hollow echo, like the clink of a glass in an empty hall. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't the 5th. It was the 17th. 17 years of cooking, cleaning, decorating, preparing, yet not one photo with me in it. Not one memory where I wasn't blurred in the background, apron stained, hair frizzed from the steam, always holding something for someone else. This time though something shifted. I didn't yell. I didn't sigh. I just folded that damp towel slowly, deliberately and laid it on the counter. My hands were shaking but not from exhaustion. From clarity. They had no idea that I was already planning. It was November 24th, 6:17 p.m. The kitchen smelled of roasted rosemary, butter and cloves, the kind of scent that wraps itself around you until it becomes part of your clothes, your skin, your hair. The windows fogged slightly from the heat, a blur against the falling dusk outside. I could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, steady as a heartbeat. They didn't hear it. They were too busy rearranging themselves for the next photo, laughing, adjusting collars, fixing hair. My daughter-in-law giggled about how she hated her side profile. My son teased his nephew for not smiling wide enough. My husband clapped his hands together saying, "One more. Let's get everyone in tight." Everyone. Except me. I leaned against the counter, pretending to check the oven timer, though the turkey had been resting for nearly half an hour already. My heart thudded in my chest, but my face remained calm, composed, almost serene. I wasn't angry in that moment. Anger burns hot and quick. No, I felt something cooler, sharper. The kind of emotion that doesn't scream. It watches. It waits. And I knew something they didn't. A small advantage I had been holding on to for years, tucked quietly away. Tonight, for the first time, I felt its weight in my pocket like a secret key. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. But knowing it was there gave me strength. "Mom, can you come hold the baby for the picture?" My daughter called over her shoulder as if tossing me a crumb. I wiped my hands on the apron. "My hands aren't clean," I said evenly. "Oh, that's fine, we'll just... Dad, can you take this one?" she chirped, already moving on, already handing the baby over to someone else. That was it. That was all I was worth. A substitute, an afterthought. I felt my jaw tighten but I stayed silent. Instead, I let my eyes wander across the scene. The sparkling string lights on the mantel, the polished silverware gleaming on the table, the careful arrangement of candles I had placed earlier that afternoon. Every detail they admired, every comfort they enjoyed, every bite they'd soon devour, it was all me. My hands. My labor. My life. And yet I was invisible. As the camera clicked again, I caught my reflection faintly in the kitchen window. My face looked older than I remembered, framed by steam and shadows. Not tired exactly. Not weak. Something else. Something indecisive. I thought back to the years behind me. The late nights prepping stuffing, the early mornings kneading dough, the countless times I slipped out of the dining room just as someone raised a toast, because the gravy needed stirring or the bread was about to burn. I remembered the Christmas 3 years ago when I worked through a migraine so fierce I could barely stand, and no one noticed except to say the potatoes were a little lumpy this year. 17 years. 17 holidays. 17 times they laughed without me. And not once did I stop them. Till now. I moved toward the table, setting down the basket of rolls. My granddaughter reached for one, her small fingers brushing the edge. I pulled the basket back just a fraction, just long enough for her to notice. She blinked at me, confused, then giggled nervously and turned away. Little things. Small, unsettling shifts. That's how it starts. I poured myself a glass of water, though I wasn't thirsty. The sound of it filled the silence that no one else seemed to hear. They were still laughing, still posing, still calling out directions about who should stand where. But to me the laughter had changed. It was hollow now, sharp around the edges, almost brittle. I sat down at the table for the first time in years before anyone else had taken their seats. I didn't say a word. I just sat, hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes on the doorway where they would soon come rushing in. Felt strange, like trying on a new skin. But it fit. Oh, it fit. The dog barked suddenly in the yard and everyone turned to look out the window. That's when my husband finally noticed me at the table. He frowned, confused. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes darting. I smiled, slow and measured. "Perfect," I said. Something in my tone must have unsettled him because he didn't press further. He just turned back toward the group, though his shoulders were stiff now, as if bracing against something. Good, I thought. Let him brace. The children ran past me, their laughter spilling into the dining room as they jostled for seats. My daughter-in-law complimented the centerpiece, asking where I'd bought it. My son patted his father on the back, already pulling out his phone to show off photos from last summer's fishing trip. The same rhythm, the same routine. As if nothing had changed. But I had. I picked up the carving knife, running my thumb lightly along the flat of the blade, not the edge. It gleamed under the light, catching the reflection of the candles. I set it down deliberately beside my plate, not near the turkey, not near the serving platter, right beside me. No one noticed. Or maybe they chose not to. When the camera came out again, I didn't move. I stayed seated. The kids leaned in, the adults squished together. My husband raised his glass. "Come on, Mom," my son said lightly, "at least sit in the front this time." The words should have been a kindness. But the way he said them, casual, dismissive, as if offering me a seat out of obligation, cut deeper than silence ever could. I looked at him. Really looked. And I let the pause stretch long enough that he shifted in his chair, his smile faltering. "I'm fine where I am," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. The room seemed to tilt just a fraction. The laughter picked up again, but quieter now, thinner, like a song played slightly out of tune. And in that moment I knew they were starting to feel it. The change. The unease. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the small object I'd kept hidden there. Smooth, cold, familiar. I didn't take it out. Not yet. But just touching it grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. They didn't notice. They wouldn't. Not until it was too late. The camera clicked one final time, the flash washing over the room. Everyone blinked, smiling, pretending. And then I stood. Fully. Deliberately. My chair scraped against the floor louder than it should have. Every head turned toward me. I met their eyes one by one, my smile steady, my voice calm. "Shall we eat?" I asked. But the way I said it made them hesitate. And for the first time in 17 years, I had their full attention. Every head turned, every smile froze, but no one moved. My words hung in the air, sharper than the carving knife beside me. For a moment, it was quiet enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator and the faint pop of a candle wick sputtering in melted wax. Then the shuffling began. Chairs scraped, children giggled nervously, and my son reached for the serving fork as if nothing was unusual. But there was no food on the table, not yet. Just polished plates, folded napkins, and glasses waiting to be filled. I stayed seated. Hands folded. Watching. They didn't know that this year was different. This was the year I let the oven stay cold. The turkey sat untouched on the counter, pale and raw, its skin loose and colorless. The herbs I'd bought days ago were still in their paper bag on the windowsill, wilting. The pie crusts lay empty in the fridge, dough rolled but never filled. The oven, that old stubborn oven that had been my battlefield for nearly 2 decades, was cold to the touch. I had done nothing. And that, more than any outburst, was my rebellion. "Mom," my daughter finally asked, her tone carefully even, "is the food ready?" Her husband chuckled nervously. "Guess we're running behind, huh?" I tilted my head as if I didn't understand the question. Then I let the silence stretch. The children fidgeted, looking from face to face, confused at the absence of steaming bowls and platters. Behind their eyes I saw the first flicker of unease. My husband cleared his throat. "The turkey." He gestured toward the counter, his voice tight. I followed his gaze, letting my eyes linger on the raw bird sprawled like an unspoken truth. "It's there," I said simply. A small murmur passed around the table. Someone coughed. My granddaughter whispered, "It's not cooked," and giggled, though it sounded more like nerves than amusement. I sipped my water. Fully. Calmly. The way one does when there's nothing to rush for. "Mom," my son pressed, his smile thinning. "What's going on?" I set the glass down. My fingers left faint prints of condensation on the stem. Nothing, I said. Absolutely nothing. Their eyes darted from me to the bird, then back again. No one laughed this time. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. The heat that usually poured from the oven on Thanksgiving was missing, replaced with the faint draft from the back door. Without the smells of roasting and spices, the house felt stripped bare, hollow. I'd never noticed how much the food covered. How much it distracted. How much it filled the silence that might otherwise reveal too much. Now there was no cover. Just silence. One of the kids asked for bread. My daughter got up, searching the counter for the basket I usually had ready. She opened the oven door. Empty. She opened the warming drawer. Nothing but cool metal. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with something between confusion and betrayal. "You didn't make anything?" she whispered. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "No." The words settled like dust. Light but inescapable. I half expected them to scold me, to raise their voices, to demand an explanation. But no one did. Instead they sat there, shifting uncomfortably, the way people do when they've walked into the wrong room and don't know how to leave. It was fascinating watching them struggle without their script. Finally my husband tried again. "We can order something," he said quickly, his eyes darting around the table. "Pizza maybe. Or Chinese." The suggestion died before it left his lips. No one nodded. No one reached for a phone. Because they knew it wasn't about food. Not really. It was about the tradition. The ritual. The thing they had taken for granted every single year without ever once asking what it cost me. I looked around at the table I had set so carefully, every detail in place except the meal itself. The napkins folded in crisp triangles. The wine glasses lined perfectly. The candles flickering low, casting shadows that stretched across their uneasy faces. Everything was ready. Except me. And for once I didn't feel guilty about it. "Why?" my daughter finally asked, her voice small. I smiled at her, a slow, deliberate smile. Because I didn't feel like it. The words tasted sweet. Not cruel, not angry. Just honest. She blinked as if she'd never heard honesty from me before. Maybe she hadn't. Not this kind. The children were restless now, their whispers carrying across the table. "But I'm hungry. Can we just go? Why isn't Grandma cooking?" Their voices pricked at the adults, but no one dared hush them. Not yet. I let the discomfort build. Let it settle into their bones. Because discomfort was the only way they might understand. As I sat there, I thought of all the years I had spent bending myself to make their holidays flawless. The burns on my arms from hot pans. The swollen feet from standing 12 hours straight. The countless times I missed the laughter, the jokes, the stories, because I was refilling plates, fetching drinks, scrubbing dishes. I thought of every moment I had been invisible. And I realized that my silence tonight was louder than any outburst could ever be. My son stood suddenly, too fast, his chair scraping the floor. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We came here to celebrate, not this." He started toward the counter as if he might take the raw bird and somehow fix it himself. He had no idea what to do, of course. He had never once bothered to learn. I watched him calm. And I didn't move to help. "Sit down," I said softly. The command startled even me. But it worked. He froze, glancing back at me, then slowly lowered himself into his chair again. I had never spoken to him like that before. Not once. And I saw the recognition in his eyes, the realization that something had changed. My husband tried to salvage the mood. "Maybe we can." "No," I cut in, my voice steady. "Tonight there's nothing. That's the point." The children were staring at me now, wide-eyed, sensing the seriousness even if they didn't fully understand it. The adults exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to argue. The clock in the hall struck 7. Its chime echoed through the house, heavy and final. 7 o'clock. The time they should have been leaning back in their chairs, plates half empty, bellies full, glasses raised in cheer. Instead they sat stiff, hands empty, mouths closed. And for the first time in 17 years I wasn't the one left out. They were. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence do its work. The flicker of the candles made their shadows twitch against the walls. The air smelled faintly of cold poultry and extinguished ambition. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. Not joy. Not triumph. Something steadier. Freedom. They didn't understand yet, not fully. But they would. This was only the beginning. I reached into my pocket, brushing the small object again, grounding myself in its weight. My hidden advantage. My quiet reminder. Not tonight. Not yet. But soon. My daughter's voice broke the silence once more. "Mom," she said carefully, almost pleading, "what are you doing?" I looked straight at her, my smile calm, my eyes unblinking. "Teaching," I said. And though they didn't grasp the lesson yet, I could see it settling in. Unease. Shame. Fear of what might come next. The dog barked again outside, sharp and sudden, making the children jump. My husband started to rise, but I placed my hand lightly on the table, not even touching him, just steady enough that he stopped. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain. I had already made my point. The turkey remained raw. The oven stayed cold. And for the first time in 17 years, so did I. The stillness wrapped around me like a second skin, heavier than the apron I had taken off hours earlier. My hands rested on the table, the faint marks from years of burns and cuts catching the glow of candlelight. I looked at them, at these hands that had served, scrubbed, kneaded, and carried, and I let the silence stretch. Then slowly I reached for the wooden block by the counter. One by one the knives caught the light as I slid them from their slots. The paring knife. The serrated blade. The carving knife, long and gleaming. I laid them carefully beside me on the table, aligned in a neat row, the way I might set out silverware for a guest. Not a single word was spoken. My granddaughter's eyes widened. "Grandma." Her voice wavered, thin as thread. I smiled at her, soft, calm, reassuring. "Don't worry, darling. They're only knives." But the way the adults shifted in their chairs told me they understood differently. They weren't thinking of chopping onions or slicing bread. They were thinking about what hadn't been done tonight, what had been left raw, left cold, left undone. And now the tools of work, of labor, sat in front of me untouched. I didn't lift them. I didn't need to. Their presence alone spoke louder than I ever could. Every one of them knew these blades had been my companions for nearly 2 decades of holidays. My fingerprints were etched into their wooden handles. My sweat, my hours, my very identity had been bound to them. And now they lay there, silent witnesses to my refusal. My son cleared his throat. "Mom, why are you?" "Because I can," I interrupted, steady as stone. His mouth closed. He glanced at his wife, who gave a small shake of her head as if to say, "Don't push her." The children whispered among themselves, their small voices carrying in the silence. I caught snippets. "Why aren't we eating? Why is she looking at us like that? Why are the knives there?" Every question was a knife of its own, cutting into the air, sharper than the steel resting by my side. I traced one handle lightly with my fingertip. The cool wood, worn smooth from years of use, felt almost foreign now. I had never noticed how heavy these tools looked when they weren't moving, when they weren't busy in my hands. A knife at rest is louder than a knife at work. "Maybe we should just start with something simple," my husband suggested, his voice careful. "The rolls, perhaps. They're always good." "There are no rolls," I replied. He blinked, as though the words themselves were strange. As though it was impossible that I hadn't baked them, impossible that I had broken the cycle. But there they sat, empty baskets. Cold oven. Cold table. Cold wife. My daughter fidgeted with her napkin, folding and unfolding it. "Mom, this isn't you." I tilted my head. "Then who is it?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Because she knew the truth. This was me, not the ghost they'd grown used to, but the woman beneath. I could feel the weight of years pressing in. 17 years of invisible labor, of sacrifices dismissed as tradition. 17 years of carving meat while no one carved out a space for me. And tonight the knives stayed clean. The candles sputtered, one flickering out with a hiss. The sudden darkness in that corner of the table made them all glance nervously, as though expecting something more to vanish. My granddaughter whispered, "It's scary." I leaned toward her gently, my voice low and kind. "No, darling. It's just different. Different feels scary sometimes." Her wide eyes met mine. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. That was more honesty than I'd received from the adults all night. My son-in-law finally spoke, his tone sharper than it should have been. "So what now? We all just sit here? Hungry? Staring at each other?" "Yes," I said simply. The word hung in the air. And no one laughed. I thought about picking up one of the knives. Not to use, not to threaten, but simply to remind them of the weight I had carried all these years. But I didn't. Leaving them untouched was stronger. It was restraint. It was choice. The knives I didn't touch said more about me than the thousands of cuts and slices I had made before. The children grew restless, asking again for food. My husband stood halfway as if to fetch something, then sat back down when I raised one hand slightly, palm open, calm but firm. "Sit," I said softly. He obeyed. That startled me almost as much as it startled them. My husband, the man who had expected and received my service for decades, sat down at one word. Maybe he didn't even realize he was obeying. Maybe habit ran deeper than pride. But I saw it. I felt it. And for the first time the power tilted. The air grew heavier by the minute, not from heat but from absence. No clatter of serving spoons, no clink of glasses, no hum of conversation. Just silence. They began to squirm. Adjusting their chairs. Clearing their throats. Pretending to sip from empty glasses. Every movement louder in the stillness. I stayed perfectly still. The clock in the hall ticked steadily. 8 minutes passed. Then 12. Then 15. No one moved toward the door. No one reached for a phone. They were trapped, though the door was wide open. Trapped by tradition. Trapped by expectation. Trapped by me. At last my daughter whispered, "Mom, please. Say something." I turned to her, my smile calm, my voice soft. "I already did. You just didn't hear me all those years." Her face crumpled slightly as though the words struck deeper than she expected. She looked down at her lap, twisting her napkin again. The knives glistened in the candlelight, untouched. Their silence louder than thunder. And still I did not move them. Because this night wasn't about what I could do with them. It was about what I chose not to do. And they were finally beginning to understand. Not with words, not with apologies, but with the way they shifted in their seats. Their shoulders stiff, their eyes darting anywhere but toward me. A family used to chatter, to clinking glasses, to laughter loud enough to drown out the creak of this old house. Now reduced to silence. It was the first time in 17 years that they sat still while I did nothing. And it was the first time I could breathe without rushing. The candles threw long shadows across the table. My son fiddled with the edge of his placemat. My daughter traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, round and round, never lifting her eyes. My husband stared at the cold bird on the counter as if sheer will might cook it. The children, restless, whispered questions too soft for answers. "Why aren't we eating? What's wrong with Grandma? Why isn't anyone talking?" Their unease filled the room more than food ever had. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unrelenting. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway was a drumbeat in their ears. Finally my son muttered, "This is ridiculous," though his voice lacked strength. I turned my head slowly toward him. He froze, caught in my gaze, and said nothing more. The silence held him still. The children grew louder now, not defiant but desperate. My youngest granddaughter began to cry softly, more from confusion than hunger. Her mother leaned over, whispering comfort, but the child's sobs carried through the stillness like cracks in glass. I didn't rise. I didn't move. For 17 years, I had soothed and comforted, patched and mended. Tonight I let the sobs ring out. Because they needed to feel what I had felt, unheard. My husband cleared his throat. "Maybe we should talk," he said cautiously, his voice breaking the quiet like a stone dropped in water. "No," I answered. "Sit. Listen." He blinked, startled by the firmness in my tone. I had never spoken to him like that in front of everyone. For a moment he looked smaller, like a man caught without his coat in a storm. And still he stayed seated. The air grew heavier by the minute. The smell of raw meat lingered, faint but insistent, mixing with the fading wax of the candles. Without the warmth of roasted food, the house felt colder than usual, as though winter had seeped through the walls. No one reached for a phone. No one dared suggest leaving. They sat trapped by their own discomfort, bound by a tradition that no longer worked. I watched them, quiet as stone, letting the silence gnaw at them the way expectation had gnawed at me for years. My daughter finally spoke, her voice fragile. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you." I leaned back, folding my arms. "You didn't notice you hurt me. That's worse." Her eyes dropped to her lap, her face flushed. She didn't argue. The silence pressed in again, thicker this time. Not empty, full. Full of guilt, shame, realization. The children tried again to break it. One of the boys drummed his fingers on the table, humming a little tune under his breath. His father hissed at him to stop, but the sound was already lodged in the air like a splinter. I remembered all the years I hummed to myself in the kitchen to fill the void, drowned out by their laughter in the other room. Now the hum irritated them. Now they noticed. And I let it linger. The candles burned lower. The wax dripped slow and steady onto the tablecloth I had ironed that afternoon. I didn't move to catch it. Let the cloth stain. Let something show the mark of neglect for once. I ran my fingers lightly across the knives at my side. Not lifting them. Not using them. Just reminding myself, and them, of their weight. The knives I didn't touch still held them captive. My husband shifted in his chair. We should at least say grace, he offered, his voice trembling between habit and desperation. I almost laughed. Grace. After years without gratitude. But I only said, you say it. I'm done. His lips parted, then closed again. He bowed his head, mumbling words that fell flat in the heavy air. No one echoed him. Not even the children. The silence after was sharper than before. I let my thoughts drift back, not to anger but to clarity. The countless holidays where I had filled the silence with effort, with service, with food. Every year I gave them noise and warmth to cover their absence of gratitude. This year I gave them nothing. And nothing was louder. My daughter-in-law finally broke, her voice rising with impatience. So what do you want from us? An apology? Thank you. Just say it. I turned to her slowly, letting the weight of my gaze settle. If I had to ask, it wouldn't mean anything. Her face flushed, her lips pressed tight, but she said nothing more. The silence swallowed her whole. The children began shifting again, restless, whining now for food, for distraction. Their little voices echoed the complaints I used to bury under casseroles and pies. This time no one rushed to soothe them. They had nothing to offer. And I didn't move. I let the discomfort grow. The clock struck 8. The sound boomed through the house, each chime rattling in their ears. An hour had passed since they'd sat down. An hour without food, without chatter, without comfort. For me it was the easiest hour of any holiday I had ever lived. My husband finally whispered, "What happens now?" I smiled. "Calm. Steady. That depends on you." Their eyes snapped to me, wide, uncertain. They were waiting for instructions, for rescue. For me to pick up the knife, to carve, to serve. But I kept my hands folded. And the knives stayed untouched. The silence grew unbearable. I saw it in their shifting, their glances, their nervous hands. They wanted noise, they wanted tradition, they wanted me to fix it. Instead I let them squirm. And in their unease I found peace. That was where it ended last time. But the silence couldn't last forever, not for them. Eventually someone had to break. And when they did, I was ready. My son slammed his palm against the table, the sound sharp in the candlelit room. "Enough," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his own frustration. This is insane. We can't just sit here all night." His words trembled at the edges, less anger, more desperation. I leaned forward slowly, resting my elbows on the table, my voice steady as stone. "Yes, we can." The silence snapped back into place, thicker than before. My son shrank under it, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting to the knives still resting untouched beside me. My husband cleared his throat, trying again to reclaim control. "We all understand you're upset," he said carefully, his words measured. "But what are you trying to prove?" I let the question hang in the air as if considering it. Then calmly I answered, "That I don't exist to serve you." No one spoke. No one dared to. The children whined louder now, some crying softly, some kicking at their chairs. Their voices were needles against the quiet, but I let them pierce the room. I had spent years silencing myself for their comfort. Tonight they could live with noise. My daughter whispered almost to herself, "I never realized." I turned to her, my voice firm. "That's the point. You never realized. None of you did." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. The raw turkey still sat on the counter, pale and obscene under the dim light. It had become more than meat now. It was truth laid bare. Truth they couldn't chew, couldn't swallow, couldn't ignore. I rose from my chair. Slowly. Deliberately. The scrape of the wood against the floor echoed like thunder. Their eyes followed me as I walked to the counter. My hands hovered over the bird, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached past it, taking hold of the object I had kept hidden in my pocket all night. It wasn't a knife. It was a photograph. A single photo, folded and creased from years of being hidden away. I laid it flat on the table in front of them. Their heads craned forward, curiosity breaking through discomfort. The picture was simple. A family gathered around a table years ago. Everyone smiling, everyone laughing. Everyone but me. I wasn't there. Because I had been in the kitchen. I pulled out another. Then another. 17 in total. 17 years of photographs. 17 holidays where I was absent. 17 memories where I had given everything and received nothing in return. One by one, I spread the photos across the table, until the polished wood was covered with proof of my absence. Do you see it now? I asked, my voice low, steady. 17 years. 17 feasts. And where was I? No one answered. Not one of them could meet my eyes. My granddaughter reached for one of the photos with her small hand, tracing the edges. You're not in them, she whispered. The simplicity of her observations struck deeper than any excuse they might have made. No, I said softly. I never was. The adults looked at the photos, then at me. My husband swallowed hard, his lips trembling. We didn't mean to erase you. But you did, I cut in sharply. Every year. You erased me with your laughter. You erased me with your pictures. You erased me with your comfort while I burned my hands to feed you. My voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. The truth was heavier than any scream. For the first time I saw shame on their faces. Real shame, not the fleeting guilt of being caught. Their eyes flickered down, their bodies folded in. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. I gathered the photos back into my hands, stacking them neatly. Then I pressed them flat against my chest. These are mine, I said. They remind me of what I lost. And tonight I'm done losing. The words tasted final. They felt like release. I walked to the kitchen doorway, the photos clutched to me, the knives still untouched on the table. Where are you going? My daughter asked, her voice almost breaking. I turned back, meeting her eyes with calm certainty. To eat. Confusion rippled through them. They glanced at the cold table, the raw bird, the empty plates. Eat what? My son muttered. I smiled. Anything I want. Alone. The air cracked like glass. Their faces fell, the reality finally settling in. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a punishment for the night. This was change. Permanent. I left them there, their stomachs empty, their silence heavy. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the small fridge tucked in the corner, and pulled out a plate I had hidden earlier. Not turkey. Not pie. Just a simple plate of food I had cooked quietly for myself that morning. Roasted vegetables, a small piece of chicken, a slice of bread. Enough for me. I carried it back into the dining room. Their eyes widened as I set the plate at my seat, filling only my glass, lifting only my fork. And then I ate. Each bite was deliberate. Each chew a declaration. The clink of my fork against the plate was louder than any toast I had ever heard. They watched, stunned, their own plates empty. For the first time in 17 years I was the only one eating at this table. And it was glorious. The children whimpered again, the adults shifted, my husband tried to speak, but I didn't pause. I didn't share. I didn't explain. This was my feast. By the time I finished, the room was still. My plate was empty, my glass drained. I set them down gently, wiped my lips with the napkin and folded my hands. I've had enough, I said softly. For tonight. For the last 17 years. For the rest of my life. No one argued. No one moved. They sat frozen in the silence I had created, the silence they had earned. I stood, gathered my plate and walked toward the kitchen without another glance back. My footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor, steady and unhurried. At the doorway I paused, turned, looked at them one last time. You can take your pictures now, I said. I won't be in them. And then I left them, with their empty plates, their hollow tradition and their silence. That night I feasted not on food but on freedom. On power. On the satisfaction of knowing I had finally reclaimed myself. 17 years they had eaten without me. Now it was my turn. The feast I finally took for myself was never on the table. It was in the choice to walk away. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories. Every week we share powerful tales of betrayal, justice, and the strength to finally choose yourself.